Today's event was organized by Professor Michael Beckerman, who will be presenting and moderating the event. And I would like to also introduce to you others, the conductor Maurice Peress, who is a professor of the Copland School of Music, as well as Professor Ellie Hisama of Columbia University, and Marcus Pyle, a PhD student at New York University. Their biographies are included in your programs. It is my pleasure and honor and privilege to present to you Professor Michael Beckerman, who will be, again, give a background information and presentation and moderate this event. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you and good afternoon. This is going to attack me. Dangerous. You know, for all the value that we attach to the arts, it's not that common for material from the arts to migrate to the front page of the newspaper or the editorial page. And usually when it does, it's for some scurrilous or gossipy reason. But on May 21st, 1893, such a thing did happen. And this was an editorial in the New York Herald. And this editorial in the Herald noted that Dvořák, in an article in the same, but in the arts pages of the same newspaper, made a strong argument that the future of American music should have African-American melodies as a foundation. This was an article called Real Value of Negro Melody, and it was, again, on May 21st, 1893. This article, and it was an interview with Dvořák, so in a way we would have had no real idea whether Dvořák endorsed all the ideas, except the following week, Dvořák himself wrote a letter reinforcing what he'd said a week earlier, saying, yeah, this is really what I think, this is really what I believe. And to have a figure as notoriously reticent as Dvořák willing to advocate such a strong stance was worthy of notice. That this was sensationalized in the press, interviews done in Europe with famous composers and performers like Rubinstein and Joachim and others to see whether they approved or not, all set up this rather extraordinary and almost unique event in the annals of American music, which was the premiere of the New World Symphony some months later in December 1893 by the New York Philharmonic. Just some very quick background on how Dvořák actually, by May of 1893, when he'd been in this country less than a year, could come to such strong conclusions. Dvořák was brought over, as we know, to start the National Conservatory, to direct the National Conservatory on 17th Street, down the block from where he lived. And he was brought by a visionary and fascinating woman named Jeanette Thurber, who had several goals, and one of her goals was to create an institution that embodied, as she understood them, the ideals of American democracy, and thus would be open to everyone regardless of race or gender, background, as long as they had talent. She also wanted to make it an absolutely first-rate institution so that people wouldn't have to go to Europe, and she also wanted it to be the source of some music that would somehow sound American in the same way as she and others thought Russian music sounded Russian, Czech music sounded Czech. And Dvořák had as his mandate at least an important part of the latter. So from the moment he arrived, he had been bombarded by various people giving him music of all sorts. He heard bands playing. The main protagonists in this were Jeanette Thurber herself, who was an advocate of African-American music as she understood it, as well as Henry Kraybill, who was an important critic, but also had an abiding interest in folk music, a subject on which he published. So from the time he arrived, Dvořák was given examples of music, shown various kinds of music, and by December of 1893, late December probably, he decided he was going to write his new symphony that was somehow going to embody this idea of a foundation of African-American melodies. It's been argued since that time whether he did or didn't, whether he actually quoted some tunes like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, or merely paraphrased them, ran them through like realists everywhere, his artistic imagination, in order to create some kind of American sound. But the fact was, again, by May, he was willing to go on very public record, not once but twice, his belief that the future of America should have African-American melodies as its foundation, and then later at the time of the symphony, restated this in various ways, and it became again the source for a renewed set of lively debates about, was there such a thing as American music? What would it mean for the future of American music to be black? And this was fought between New York and Boston and other places over several months, and one might say not completely resolved. So there are a couple of things. First of all, we still don't know a lot about this time, and as any historian knows, making firm conclusions on, well, uncertain facts is really not a very effective way of going about things. And so even to say exactly what he did and how he did it, I think there still remains a lot of open questions, some of which will come up today. But I think there are some other things as well. In the literature, for reasons that are somewhat obvious, but I think still need to be articulated, this has always been viewed entirely from a positive vantage point. As if Dvořák was a progressive, Jeanette Thurber was progressive, and the only way that we can regard it is as something positive. And that we may reach such a conclusion, but we have an odd mandate here at DAHA, the Dvořák American Heritage Association, which is twofold. And they don't usually clash, but they're not the same. One is to, in light of the fact that the organization was created just around the time the Dvořák home was destroyed, to perpetuate and honor and celebrate Dvořák's legacy in the United States. And that's a mandate we take very seriously. But we also have the other mandate, and the other mandate is to investigate. And no investigation that knows the outcome is much of an investigation. So celebration is one form of understanding things and advocating for Dvořák, but also investigating, asking questions. And in order to ask questions, you have to ask all questions. You have to ask smart questions and dopey questions, all of them. And I hope that we will be asking these kinds of questions about Dvořák's time today. So we've put together a panel that we think has a lot of different kinds of perspective. I'd like to briefly introduce the first panelist. You can see his biography, but Maurice Peress is somebody who has been working on Dvořák's American years for an awfully long time. When I started getting involved in the subject around 1990, 1991, he'd already been working on this subject and was an acknowledged expert. His book, Dvořák to Ellington, is a classic, and he not only sort of reads about the music and studies it, but as a conductor and a performer and a profound musical thinker, lives this music as well. So let me ask for a warm welcome from Maurice Peress, who will lead things off.
Thank you, Mike. One comment about being honest about the investigation of Dvořák. One of the things that got me involved was comparing the attitude towards Dvořák's American connection in a well-known historian's book where the first edition went on for 8 or 9 pages. Second edition almost dismissed it. And I found that in the in the academic world of musicology, they had decided Dvořák, we're over pushing the idea of Dvořák's connection to black music. By the time he left, he wasn't that interested in them. He had kind of moved away from that idea. And then I started digging myself in his American period. A lot of scholars hadn't really gone through the newspapers, and one had, but didn't really publish. And I discovered that in Dvořák's class of 10 or 12 American students were the teachers, the future teachers of Ellington, Gershwin, and Copland. And when I announced that at the Dvořák down in New Orleans, I think it was 1990 in fact, all the scholars dropped their mouths dropped. And these are three major figures in the history of 20th century music. And so that fact that there was an actual connection between his students and them was really opened up and loosened up this connection. So it was accepted again that yes, Dvořák was enthusiastic about the black musicians, black music. And so I quickly jumped to his famous statement that he discovers all that is needed for a great and noble school of music. And I go to the last statement of Dvořák. The American musician understands these tunes and they move sentiment in him. So it wasn't just the fact that the music, it was how it affected not just black people, but the general community. And he saw that in America, because he was very connected to the folk music of Bohemia. And he built an entire repertoire based on that. And there's a big nationalistic school developing at the time. And so Dvořák was looking for a parallel in this country to all of the richness of Bohemian musical history and fables and stories, and he was quite dedicated to using them in his work. Rusalka being a great example, the opera Rusalka being a great example. So he's looking for a parallel here in America. What music is their national? Their meaning he's looking at us. What do Americans see as a national music? And he realized more and more that it seemed like the music of black people had really captured the imagination. Yet the composers, American composers, or composers in general here in this country, were not using it as a resource, the same way the Czech composers were using Bohemian fables and stories and music as a resource. So I wanted to just jump back before Dvořák. I was lucky enough to be in a class with Kurt Sachs as a young man. I was a jazzer. And Kurt Sachs was a great Berlin scholar, came to America. Of course, we gained a lot of great people because of Mr. Hitler. And he came to this country. He would never speak German. He would pick up a German text and read it in English. He did the same thing in Portugal. And he came up, he said in one of the classes that the chaconne, we think of and the saraband, these are dance suites from the Baroque and pre-Baroque periods, that the chaconne and Baroque, help me.
Saraband.
Yeah, and the saraband actually have African roots. What? It was a chacona, it was called. It was a lewd and lascivious dance that was brought over by the enslaved people, is the right word, enslaved people, in the 16th century and 17th century already, outlawed by the Pope. The saraband was a wild dance which slowed down, and we then had these beautiful sarabands with this very slow bass. Yet they had so that kind of caught my imagination, that this attraction of America in general, what we call America, North and South, the attraction to music from Africa was deep and old and had lived a long time. So I often say that had Dvořák not come to this country and point out what he pointed out, trying to help us understand ourselves. Had he never come, this music was already erupting, was already built into the DNA of the American spirit. So I wanted to mention that. When Dvořák came here, there's already this long-standing connection to things African, and in particular, the peculiar music, there's the word used again and again, the peculiar music of African Americans. There were several important concerts at Dvořák gave, one in particular at Madison, the old Madison Square Garden, that featured his black students, composers, the choir. He had a black choir that he was in charge of. And they gave this great clothing concert to read. I have to quickly jump and say that at that moment in time, 1893, there were more lynchings in the history of our country. Something unbelievable. This dichotomy between these wealth-thinking people at the New York Herald and Mrs. Thurber, there was like an oasis of this regard for things for Black Americans. At the same time, this country was at war with the fact that Lincoln had freed the slaves, whatever you want to say. So we have to remind ourselves that what Dvořák experienced was unusual here. Okay, so he gives this phenomenal concert, free clothing fund concert, an intensely poignant, joyous event. One of those rare concerts when the performers in the audience are magically joined. Above all, Dvořák comes off as an unusually warm and nurturing human being, a mensch. It is no wonder that after the composer's death in 1904, Sylvester Russell, a leading black journalist with a national following, was moved to close his obituary, quote, "If it were possible, the Afro-American musicians alone could flood his grave with tears." So this adoration by the black community was quite deep. I worked with Bill Warfield later when we tried to rescue the Dvořák house. I'd worked with him before as an artist. He sang Porgy and Bess with me years and years ago and taught me so much about the piece. Bill said to me that he was the head of the Black Music Association. And so he knew all the important black artists, singers, fiddle players, everything. And he said to me that the black community has a great affection for Dvořák. This is in the 1960s. All right. So this idea, this connection continues. One last notion, and then I'm going to do a disclaimer. But one last notion. Okay. When he writes the New World Symphony, at 9 o'clock in the morning, or 9-ish, he signs it. I don't have any, but he signs the full score of the New World Symphony, thanks to God, completed 9 o'clock this morning. That day he gets a telegram. His children and his wife and an aunt had all arrived to spend the summer with him in America. They went out to Spillville, they saw the World's Fair in Chicago, but at this moment, he gets this telegram. He goes back to the score. He goes back to the score, and there's a second dedication. I call it a dedication. Children arrived, so-and-so, Southampton, wherever they came in on, and signs of thanks to God. Why did he go back? And I'm not the first person to ask this question. Jan, what's his name? Yeah, in Prague, one of the last important Dvořák scholars. Jarmil asked this question, this curious, going back to the score, and he didn't try to explain it, I tried to explain it. Dvořák comes here early, and just as all the excitement for the 1892 celebration of Columbus coming and discovering America, and the city is there are flotillas, and the bridge, Brooklyn Bridge, has these Niagaras of fireworks. What we now call the arch down on Washington Square was at that time was plasterboard. He put one up, and the city, they put one up, he didn't put one up. The city was flooded. He was in a hotel which looked down on Union Square, and they were forming these parades, including Czech Sokols would come out, and every ethnic was represented. Mr. Trump should know about this one. Every ethnicity was represented in those parades, celebrating the discovery of our country. The discovery, or no, Native Americans have discovered, if anybody. But anyway, the event of Columbus coming here. And so he writes in his journal, I cannot express extraordinary excitement about America. You know, he already has this sense, not connected to black people at this point, but just to the whole notion of America. And that was, I think, an important idea. So here we come now back to the score, the full score of the New World Symphony. I think he was signing it again to bless his children with the energy and strength that he experienced in this country. Now, I know scholars are not supposed to say things like this. I'm saying it. You know, we have to use our instincts now. Mike's guilty of that all the time. And so here again is this recognition of this great experience that he had in this country. I hope for all that, and then finally I have a disclaimer. I have spent most of my life, my musical life, conducting, arranging, reconstructing, and writing about what I have called delicious musical intermarriages between jazz and symphonic, folk and classic, fill in as you wish, which is why Dvořák's American adventures so appealed to me. But I have to recognize that Dvořák's dream of creating a school of American symphonic composers, classical composers, inspired by the, quote, the music of the Negro, with the symphony of the New World as offered as a model. This is what we can do with this black music, if we wish to, was to be fulfilled in ways that Dvořák could never have imagined. The irony being that his very inspiration, the wellspring of America's Negro-inspired popular music, minstrels, slave songs, cakewalks, and spirituals had long been arising on their own. They burst forth, flooding the first half of the 20th century with ragtime, blues and swing, and jazz, a unique heart of improvisation that captivated the globe. Three of Dvořák's grand students of his students, Ellington, Gershwin, and in his youth, Copland, composed American masterworks for jazz bands and hybrid orchestras. American songwriters, white and black, recreated the Broadway musical. It was very Viennese, you know, before that. By the end of the American century, with the help of films, radio, and recordings, the sounds of America's pop music was welcomed throughout the globe. Louis Armstrong's Old Testament licks continued to grace the bars of Shanghai and Prague. I sat in bars in Shanghai and Prague, and over the PA system comes Louis. And the cutting edge styles of rock and roll, hip hop, rap, and those yet to be imagined. I once signed a contract with the Bernstein office that I was giving up the rights. I was a gun for hire. I was giving up the rights to this orchestration I did, and that I have no right to ever come back for the technical use of this material, yet to be imagined. Yet to be imagined. So here I say here that, so Armstrong is out there in the earth, and all these cutting edges that continue to rise, yet to be, even those yet to be imagined, continue to rise from the America's black community. So yes, Dvořák was insightful in his 1892 analysis and prediction. Americans and American musicians were inspired, are inspired by the music of the Negro. But we may have to examine why there are so few black players, conductors, and composers in the classical musical world. Yet Asians have made a place for themselves. Is this really a problem? So I'm finished by saying, I'm interested in seeing what was the outcome of this great dream, this great powerful man to come in here and educate us. Artists are always sensitive to things that, before we are, they smell the zeitgeist. And so Dvořák's feeling about black music of his time was quite an insight by a great sensitive artist. And that's all I have to say.
Well, maybe I'll just take 2 seconds, or maybe more than 2 seconds, to sort of wander over it, and just for those who are not as familiar with this topic, to make it, well, as sonically clear as possible what Dvořák understood as black music or African American music. I'll do it without mic, I'm sorry, but you'll hear me. Well, the most famous example is this, which most people think is, so you just take off the first measure of swing low. In music, you can never say 100%, but Dvořák knew that tune, he'd received it. He'd also received several articles that described characteristics of African American music as he understood it. One of them was the use of the 5-note scale, pentatonic sextet. Another was use of a particular rhythm, sometimes called the Scotch snap.
I call it the doo-dah.
The doo-dah. And whether it comes from, you know, hard trials, he had access to many African American melodies at that time through 2 primary sources, through articles and through someone we'll hear about later, Harry Burleigh, who sang for him. But he received things that sounded like this. And I think out of that he made things like. And he got others that sounded like this. So he seems to have an idea of black song that is pentatonic, that is energetic, but also expressive. So, for example, the famous. Seems to have been maybe stolen away as part of the substructure of the largo. So many of his most famous pieces, I even think from the cello concerto is. He wrote it during Christmas season and probably heard that.
Go tell it to the mountain.
So using these kinds of tunes, and I even think that this Rusalka, which is supposed to be purely Czech, this tune was written in the United States, and this variant of it sounds, again, like an American variant. Now, you could say that there are so many variants of that tune in the opera that one of them has to sound American. But again, I think this kind of sound world with Dvořák using pentatonic scales, certain notions of rhythm, harmonic layering, which he knew in some form from back home, but remodeled here. And finally, this notion of expressivity that he spoke about quite often in relation to this music, that it had a depth. And again, it's possible that it was the fact that Dvořák, as a deeply religious man, identified immediately with the biblical power of the lyrics of these songs, something which Czech folk music had. Again, Czech folk music being mostly about drinking and chasing girls, was a different order. And I think he actually knew more about American music when he left than he ever knew about Moravian music. Anyway, let me introduce our next panelist, Ellie Hisama, who is a professor at Columbia University. This is not her area of research, so we're thrilled to have her here because it's the only thing better than having people who have been working on a subject forever is people who are looking at it freshly. And I look forward very much to your perspective. Thank you.